Welcome to the Bare Minimum Health Podcast, where we talk about how to keep the wheels turning when you're exhausted and in pain. It can be overwhelming when you deal with a chronic illness, chronic pain, chronic fatigue. So let's take some of the pressure off because really the things that are the bare minimum are the things that have the biggest impact on our well being and how we feel anyway. And one of the core skills, habits that I come back to time and time again when it comes to the bare minimum is mindfulness. And as a dietitian, I end up talking specifically about mindful eating all the time with basically every client that I've worked with. I end up talking about mindful eating. And there's a lot of reasons behind that, which I'll get to as I'm talking today. But one of the biggest misconceptions about mindful eating is that it is a thinking process versus a body process, or at least that's what people think. You hear people say, I need to be more mindful about what I'm eating. And they mean I need to think about what I'm eating. I need to think about what I eat before I eat it. And people think of that as mindful eating, but it's not. Mindful eating is a very embodied experience. You're focused on your senses, both the external sight, smell, sound, touch. Yeah, those are all the five external senses, as well as your internal senses, the sense of proprioception of where your body is in space, that sense of balance, of groundedness, your feet touching the ground, your butt in the chair, and your hunger and satiety and thirst. All of these senses, and they're very body oriented. It's a very body focused process because we are so in our heads all the time, especially with food. You think about nutrition and you think about diets and you think about weight loss and you think about your body and you think about what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat and what you heard on the radio or you saw on Instagram or whatever those thoughts are. You think about food all the time and it makes food this very cognitive thing when in actuality, food is very physical. And that embodied experience is where the power of mindful eating lies. And it's a part of dialectical behavior therapy, a way of managing your mental health because it is such a grounding, positive experience to get out of your head and into your body through mindful eating. So mindful eating is an amazing tool for your mental well being as well as your physical well being. Because when you eat mindfully, when you mind when you do mindful eating, you're able to switch your body from this high intensity, high energy, fight, flight, freeze mode into rest and digest, right? So you're switching the systems of your body and sort of calming the nervous system, and it improves your digestion. Right? I've had many clients come to me. I'm thinking of one person in particular who was having a lot of stomach pains and bloating and gas. The main thing we implemented was mindful eating. And between the first appointment and the second appointment, she had a massive improvement in how she felt simply from mindful eating. So that rest and digest, that calming, grounding experience that you get from mindful eating, it not only has that huge mental health benefit, it improves your physical well-being in the short term with that digestion. It also improves your well-being in the long term because of this mindful to intuitive pathway When you eat mindfully, you are giving the unconscious pattern recognition in your mind high quality data. Your mind is constantly looking for patterns. It's the reason we see shapes in the clouds and faces on the fronts of cars because our brain is primed for pattern recognition. But when you are distracted scrolling on your phone while you're eating or thinking about that email you need to send or stressing about something that happened in the morning, it's not as easy for your brain to connect your eating to how you feel when there's all this other extraneous stuff happening in your mind while you're eating. So, focusing on that embodied sense of what am I sensing externally and how do I feel internally gives your mind high quality data so it can very accurately predict if I were to eat this or drink this, I will feel like this. And that's intuition. That's the result of the unconscious pattern seeking and unconscious pattern recognition that you get when you eat mindfully, when you do mindful eating. Eating is one of the great pleasures in life. With mindful eating, you can expand the pleasure that you get from food. You can elevate your normal day to day meals into something that is pleasurable, that is calming, that is enjoyable, that is exciting, that is something that feels good. And we don't allow that in our lives sometimes. We all have busy lives, and we don't often take time to do things just because they are enjoyable. And it's such a shame, really. And we are all guilty of that. I am guilty of that too. But with mindful eating, you have the opportunity to multiple times a day get this dose of pure physical pleasure. And why would you not take advantage of that? Mindful eating is very simple in concept, right? Just pay attention to the physical experience that you're having and pay attention to how you are physically feeling. But it's not always easy because we get distracted. Whether, it's a child who decides to get up and run away from the table, whether it's an email, whether it's a thought that pops into your own head, we get distracted. And for those of us with chronic illnesses, there's another layer to it. It's not just the life distractions or the internal brain distractions. It's the fact that our body is not a comfortable place to be all of the time. There's an instinct to avoid pain. Whether that pain is emotional or physical, there's a very strong inclination to avoid feeling that pain. And when it is physical, that means separating ourselves from our body in our minds. It means ignoring some of the signals from our bodies because they're either inaccurate, some pain when you have chronic pain is meaningless. It's like telling someone with anxiety to do things that scare them when everything is scary. You have to develop the ability to differentiate the different shades of anxiety or the different shades of pain. But in order to do that, you have to feel it. There are times when you need to distract. You cannot cope with the pain that you are feeling. And that is a valid and underrated part of having a chronic illness. But at the same time, when you do allow yourself the ability to pay attention to the quality of pain that you're feeling and to pay attention to the broader breadth of how you feel throughout your body and not just the pain, you are able to uncover different nuances, whether that's, this is joint pain versus muscular pain versus emotional pain versus fatigue versus all of the different rainbows of experience that we have. But first, we have to overcome that instinct to avoid the pain. And mindful eating is a really great stepping stone into that because you don't have to directly confront all of your pain. You can first focus on your senses and how you are experiencing the food specifically. And that can often be that doorway into broader mindfulness and that broader mindful skill that can unlock so many aspects when we're talking about the bare minimum health plan. So it's simple, but it's not easy, which is a phrase that comes up time and time again across anything to do with mindfulness. It's simple, but not easy. Another phrase that comes up often in the mindfulness space is simply begin again. When you notice that you have forgotten to eat mindfully, when you notice that you're feeling a little bit off, overfull, bloated, overly hungry, pause and think, how do I feel right now? What do I need? And those two key questions can help you slow down for a moment and respond more thoughtfully, more mindfully to your physical experience. And eventually, you'll start to intuitively connect the dots that it feels good to eat well. It feels good to mindfully eat. And it becomes this positive cycle driving you forward towards something that feels good and is good for you. Versus the way we typically set New Year's resolutions or goals, where we get so down and judgmental and shame filled about our past habits, and we try to yell ourselves into submission to do the right thing. And that never lasts very long. That white knuckle willpower, I'm gonna do it, I'll show you. It, it works for a while, it works for some people, but it doesn't naturally lead to long-term change unless you can make a shift into a more self-sustaining method where you're doing it because it feels good. So why not start from that place? Start from mindful eating. Start from enjoying your food and paying attention to how you feel. At the end of the day, the bare minimum health approach is about identifying your needs and meeting them in a way that doesn't use up too many of your spoons, but instead gives you energy so you can keep building on the positive changes that you're making. And I have only just scratched the surface of mindful eating. So make sure you're following along to learn more about mindful eating and many other topics under the umbrella of bare minimum health. So follow along, check the description or the show notes for a link to get the Bare Minimum Health Plan ebook, and leave a comment. I'd love to know what questions or thoughts are coming up for you so I can make sure to include that in a future episode.